Sean.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can you hear me? Because I can't really hear myself.
Does this... Nick was rearranging the microphones earlier. No, that was a joke. It's a great pleasure to be here at what seems to be the first day of spring or summer. It's wonderful, always wonderful to be in Oxford, and very wonderful to be addressing such a large audience on such an important subject, and of course a great honour to be participating in an Orwell debate in this very special year. And as you've heard, it is the 60th anniversary of 1984, which we try to remember as a warning, not a blueprint for living. But it's also, I'm very proud to say, the 75th anniversary of Liberty, the National Council for Civil Liberties. And as was alluded to earlier, George Orwell is one of the more famous members of my organisation, and I'm not a one-woman campaign, flattering though that might have seemed in the introduction. Far, far from it. We're still, as we always were, at our heart, a membership organisation. And we very much stand on the shoulders not just of thousands upon thousands of members up and down the land. Some of you may be in hiding in this room. I won't ask you to put your hands up. But also those who came before, including Orwell and Attlee and H.G. Wells, and the list goes on from those early years in particular. We will sketch over some of those who came later, because some of them hear different drummers now. But it is a great honour to be representing Liberty in its 75th year, 75 years of campaigning for fundamental rights and freedoms in Britain. And Liberty's journey is kind of relevant, I think, to today's debate, which we deliberately set out as a discussion of whether the Human Rights Act should be scrapped in favour of something else that is often mooted as a British Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. And if you want to get to the heart of my concerns about that often mooted instrument, mooted a lot rhetorically but with very little substance, I might add, the clue is really in the title. Moving away from a Human Rights Act for human beings to a British Bill of Rights with responsibilities. Do you see the two concerns that I have? Moving away, on the one hand, for rights that are universal, that belong to human beings just because they're alive anywhere in the world, to something that is more contingent on A, citizenship, and B, upon somehow the adequate performance or discharge of responsibilities. Now you can see how attractive this new idea might be to certain audiences, but you must also, I think, reflect for a moment on my concerns. Liberty predates World War II, importantly, and so in a sense there wasn't really a modern idea of universal human rights that belong to human beings in any real sense before World War II. And so whilst we're very, very proud of our history that begins in 1934, a moment that's incredibly special to all of us human rights campaigners in Liberty, in this country and around the world, is that post-war moment. In particular, after the Holocaust and after the Blitz, where people slightly to the left of politics, slightly to the right of politics, representatives of all the great world religions and people of no religious conviction whatsoever, managed to come together. And we're having this conversation, of course, on the eve of the G20. Will they agree anything? Will they agree anything meaningful? We hope so. We don't know. But imagine these people from all over the world, not just from 20 countries, but well beyond that, rich and poor, black and white, to the left, to the right, all the great world faiths came together and agreed on certain fundamentals that they believed essential to democracy and essential to human dignity. And there were no great surprise or controversy in this country because, of course, we're fortunate enough to live in the oldest unbroken democracy on earth, and that is a great fortune. So let's be clear: 1984 has not come to pass, and in a sense, the great danger in Britain is of complacency because we are so fortunate, and of incremental departures from legal norms. But nonetheless, that framework, you could argue that in many senses had its roots in this country free speech, fair trials, no torture, equal treatment under the law. Not always honoured in substance, but honoured more or less in this country. Nonetheless, that framework in the post-war period became shared not just in these islands, but in continental Europe and in the wider world, including the new Commonwealth countries, including the one from which my parents came to this country. So a really, really important moment where we say rights aren't contingent on citizenship, not just American rights or British rights or French rights, and they can't be completely contingent on good behaviour, because if they were, it would be okay, would it not, to restore the death penalty or to torture very bad people who've been proven to do terrible things. And that framework is agreed at that moment, and that, in a sense, I think, is what is at stake constantly for each generation, not just in Britain, but all over the world. And if we needed a more recent warning of what happens when you hand our rights to states, the rights that belong to people, you hand them to governments of any persuasion or hand them to states, you don't even need to look at Orwell's wonderful work. You can look at more recent events. Because, of course, it was because clever lawyers in Washington, D.C. were able to advise the former president that these people don't have the same rights as us because they're not American nationals, and because Guantanamo Bay is offshore rather than onshore, that some of the worst mistakes of the in my view, much misguided and misnamed war on terror. And Orwellian to me, it doesn't mean having 3 CCTV cameras in your street instead of 2. Orwellian to me is ultimately about the abuse of language that becomes a distortion of ideas and values, that becomes the abuse of people. So Orwellian to me is these terrible euphemisms. Waterboarding is not a seaside sport. Extraordinary rendition means kidnap and torture. That to me is Orwellian. The Ministry of Peace, and so on, when we mean the Ministry of War. That's really Orwell's warning to me personally. And so I say that rights contingent on nationality in particular, rather than humanity, are, if you're not very careful indeed, the road to Guantanamo Bay. So given that we have something so precious in the Universal Declaration, given that it was reflected in regional instruments around the world after World War II, given that actually, and I often criticise the government, that's part of my job, but I will give them credit for a Human Rights Act that is for human beings and is one of the more progressive parts of the New Labour legacy. Let's not throw that away lightly. Let's make sure that any further developments, any newer shiny bills of rights that new prime ministers want to bring in, because it does suit your vanity a little bit. If you can really leave your name on the furniture if you draft new constitutions and bills of rights. Let's make sure that they are truly progressive, and that most of all they are human rights for human beings and not rights contingent on nationality or being deemed to be worthy by those in power. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.